When Karen kept targeting his mailbox, Marcus decided to fight back with a steel wall that would change everything. What happened next was both shocking and utterly satisfying. Life was usually peaceful in a quiet suburban neighborhood in town, USA. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and mailboxes that stood like sentinels at the end of each driveway. But for one homeowner, Marcus Johnson, a 35-year-old black man who had recently moved into the area, the peace was about to be shattered, literally. Marcus had noticed something strange shortly after moving in. His mailbox, a standard model he'd purchased from the local hardware store, kept getting damaged. At first he thought it might be kids playing pranks or maybe even a careless driver. But as the weeks went by, the incidents became more frequent and more deliberate. The mailbox was knocked over, dented, and even smashed to pieces on multiple occasions. Each time Marcus would sigh, clean up the mess, and replace it, hoping it would be the last time. But it wasn't. The destruction continued, and Marcus began to suspect that something more sinister was at play. He started paying closer attention to his surroundings, and one evening his suspicions were confirmed. As he peered out his window, he saw his neighbor, Karen, a middle-aged white woman who lived across the street, deliberately swerve her car into his mailbox, knocking it over with a loud crash. Marcus was furious. He stormed outside, confronting Karen as she stepped out of her car. "What the hell is your problem?" he demanded, pointing to the mangled remains of his mailbox. "Why do you keep doing this?" Karen, however, was unfazed. She crossed her arms and smirked. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said dismissively. "Maybe you should be more careful where you put your mailbox. It's practically in the road." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "It's in the same place as everyone else's," he shot back. "You're the only one who keeps hitting it. What's your deal?" Karen shrugged. "Accidents happen," she said, before turning on her heel and walking back into her house, leaving Marcus standing there, fuming. Marcus knew he had to do something. He couldn't keep replacing his mailbox every week, and he couldn't let Karen get away with her blatant disrespect. But what could he do? He thought about calling the police, but he doubted they would take him seriously. After all, it was just a mailbox, right? And without concrete proof, it would be his word against hers. Marcus had reached his breaking point. He was tired of the constant destruction of his mailbox and Karen's blatant disrespect. It wasn't just about the mailbox anymore. It was about standing up for himself and refusing to let her intimidation tactics work. He knew he needed a solution that would not only stop Karen in her tracks, but also send a clear message that he wasn't going to be pushed around. One evening, after yet another incident where his mailbox lay in pieces on the ground, Marcus sat down and brainstormed. He thought about calling the police, or even confronting Karen again, but he knew those options wouldn't solve the root of the problem. Karen would just deny everything, and the cycle would continue. No, Marcus needed something more permanent, something that would make it impossible for Karen to damage his property ever again. The next morning, Marcus headed to the local hardware store with a plan in mind. Instead of picking up another cheap, flimsy mailbox, he went straight to the heavy-duty materials section. He purchased thick steel posts, bags of quick-setting concrete, and a solid steel plate. He also grabbed a welding kit, determined to create something that could withstand anything Karen or anyone else threw at it. Back at home, Marcus got to work. He dug a deep hole at the end of his driveway, far deeper than necessary for a standard mailbox. He set the steel posts into the hole, securing them with the concrete to ensure they were immovable. Once the concrete had set, He welded the steel plate to the top of the posts, creating a mailbox that was more like a fortress than a simple piece of street-side decor. The final product was a towering, indestructible structure that looked like it belonged on the front lines of a battle, rather than in a quiet suburban neighborhood. When Karen saw the new mailbox, her reaction was exactly what Marcus had expected. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, glaring at the steel behemoth with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. "What's that eyesore supposed to be?" she called out, her voice dripping with disdain. Marcus, who had been watching from his driveway, walked over calmly. "It's my new mailbox," he said, his tone steady and confident. "I figured if you're going to keep hitting it, it might as well be something that can take the abuse." Karen rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath before retreating back into her house. But Marcus could see the frustration in her face. Her little game of intimidation had backfired, and she knew it. The steel mailbox wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of Marcus's refusal to be bullied. It stood as a testament to his resilience and ingenuity, a bold statement that he wasn't going anywhere. As Marcus walked back to his house, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had taken control of the situation, turning Karen's petty actions into an opportunity to assert his strength and independence. The steel mailbox wasn't just a solution to a problem, it was a declaration. And Marcus knew that, no matter what happened next, he had already won. The neighborhood was quiet, as it usually was in the late afternoon. Marcus was inside his house, catching up on some work, when he heard a loud metallic crash that echoed through the streets. The sound was unmistakable. It was the kind of noise that made your heart skip a beat. Marcus rushed to the window, his mind immediately jumping to his mailbox. He half expected to see it lying in ruins again, but what he saw instead left him stunned. Karen's car, a mid-sized sedan, was crumpled against the steel mailbox, its front end completely smashed. The hood was bent upward, the windshield cracked, and steam hissed from the damaged engine. Karen was still in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the wheel, her face pale and dazed. It was clear she had hit the mailbox at full speed, likely thinking she could plow through it like she had done with the previous ones. But this time, the steel wall Marcus had built didn't budge, not even an inch. Marcus grabbed his phone and dialed 911, reporting the accident in a calm but urgent tone. He then rushed outside to check on Karen, his initial anger toward her momentarily replaced by concern. As he approached the car, he could see that she was shaken but appeared unharmed. The airbags had deployed, likely saving her from serious injury. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but firm. Karen blinked, still in shock, before nodding slowly. I didn't think," she stammered, her usual confidence shattered. Marcus didn't say anything more. He knew this moment spoke for itself. The police arrived shortly after, followed by an ambulance to ensure Karen wasn't seriously hurt. As the officers assessed the scene, Marcus explained the situation. How Karen had repeatedly damaged his mailbox, how he had replaced it with a reinforced steel version, and how this accident was the culmination of her actions. Karen, realizing she was caught, finally admitted to her behavior. She confessed to deliberately targeting Marcus's mailbox, though she tried to downplay it as just a joke and not a big deal. The officers weren't amused. They issued her a citation for reckless driving and property damage, and her insurance company would have to cover the cost of the repairs to her car. The aftermath of the accident was a turning point. Karen's smug demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet embarrassment. She avoided eye contact with Marcus and the neighbors who had gathered to watch the scene unfold. The once dominant figure in the neighborhood now looked small and defeated, her attempts to intimidate Marcus having backfired spectacularly. For Marcus, the incident was a moment of vindication. He had stood his ground, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The steel mailbox had done its job, but more importantly, it had proven that Marcus wasn't someone who could be pushed around. He had turned the tables on Karen, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his sense of dignity and respect. As the tow truck hauled away Karen's damaged car, Marcus stood in his driveway looking at the steel mailbox. It was unscathed, not a dent or scratch on it. It stood tall and unyielding, a symbol of resilience and strength. Marcus smiled to himself, knowing that this wasn't just the end of Karen's harassment. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could finally feel at peace in his own home. The days following the dramatic showdown with Karen brought a noticeable shift to the neighborhood. The once tense atmosphere began to ease, and Marcus could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Karen, who had been a constant source of frustration, was now keeping to herself. The accident had humbled her, and the consequences of her actions, both legal and financial, had made her rethink her behavior. She no longer glared at Marcus from across the street or made snide remarks under her breath. Instead, she avoided him altogether, a small but significant victory for Marcus. Word of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had previously stayed out of the conflict now approached Marcus with curiosity and admiration. They had seen Karen's car crumpled against the steel mailbox, and they couldn't help but be impressed by Marcus's ingenuity. Some even joked that the mailbox was the toughest thing on the block, while others asked if Marcus could help them reinforce their own mailboxes. Marcus laughed off the requests, explaining that his steel mailbox was a one-of-a-kind solution to a very specific problem. But he was happy to share his story, and as he did, he noticed something changing in the way his neighbors interacted with him. They no longer saw him as the new guy or the outsider. They saw him as someone who stood up for himself, someone who refused to be bullied. It was a subtle shift, but it made a world of difference. The steel mailbox itself became a local legend. Kids on their way to school would stop to touch it, marveling at its strength. Delivery drivers would chuckle as they dropped off packages, commenting on its indestructible design. Even the mail carrier, who had seen countless mailboxes in their career, gave Marcus a thumbs up and called it the most impressive mailbox on the route. For Marcus, the mailbox was more than just a functional object. It was a symbol of his resilience. It represented his refusal to back down, his determination to protect what was his, and his ability to turn a negative situation into a positive outcome. Every time he walked past it, he felt a sense of pride, a reminder that he had faced adversity head-on and come out stronger on the other side. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to be learning her lesson. She started being more civil to Marcus when their paths crossed, offering a curt nod or a mumbled hello instead of her usual glare. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Marcus didn't hold a grudge. He was just glad the harassment had stopped. He had no interest in escalating the situation further. He simply wanted to live his life in peace. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. Marcus's steel mailbox remained standing, untouched and unbroken, a silent sentinel at the end of his driveway. It served as a reminder to everyone that respect and decency were non-negotiable, and that standing up for oneself was always worth it. For Marcus, life in the neighborhood finally felt like home. He had faced a challenge, overcome it, and in doing so had earned the respect of his neighbors. The steel mailbox was more than just a solution to a problem. It was a testament to his strength, his creativity, and his unwavering determination to live life on his own terms. And as he stood in his driveway looking at the mailbox that had started it all, Marcus couldn't help but smile. He had turned a story of conflict into one of triumph, and that was something no one could ever take away from him.